All right. Well, it's 6 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in tonight as we kick off another season of Conservation Conversations. My name is Ed Pritchard, and I work with Miami Eco Adventures. So we're a division of Miami-Dade Parks and a co-host of this webinar, alongside tonight's speaker, Anna, who's with IFAS Extension and Florida Sea Grant. It's really great to see some of our regulars. And for those that are new, welcome and thank you for taking the time tonight to be a part of this webinar series. We're really excited about our lineup of talks this fall. We're starting with tonight's talk, but a reminder that we host these webinars every month on the second Wednesday through December. We've covered a wide range of topics in the last couple of years, all of which you can actually watch online. They're available for viewing on the IFAS Extension Miami-Dade YouTube page. We can always put a link for that later on so that you guys can view some of these presentations we've had over the last couple of years. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items. Everyone in this webinar is currently muted, and we would like to hear from you. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. Those will go to myself and Anna, and at the end of the presentation, we will actually take the time to answer them during our Q&A. We also have some polls throughout the presentation, so we encourage you guys to participate in those as well. And as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded, and so we'll send this link out probably in the next couple of days so that you guys can share that with others that weren't able to join us. And if you enjoy these webinars and this kind of content, please follow us on our social media pages at Miami Eco Adventures and at Miami-Dade Sea Grant. We also have our list of upcoming webinars on there as well. And that same link that you signed up for tonight's talk, you can sign up for those talks through the rest of the season. So with that said, I'm very excited to introduce tonight's speaker, Anna Zangroniz, who will be presenting on ways to reduce litter in the city of Miami through community engagement. Take it away, Anna.
Thanks, Ed. Great to be here, everybody. And thanks for tuning in. Before we dive right into what we're going to be talking about tonight, I'm going to invite you to participate in a little poll, please. Ed is going to launch it, and you'll use your mouse to make your selections and hit submit at the end. Number 1, CAP stands for Circularity Assessment Protocol, true or false. Number 2, the average pounds of trash per person per day in Miami-Dade County is 4.9 pounds, 5.9 pounds, 6.9 pounds, or 7.9 pounds. And lastly, icy change can be used to report flooding, fish kills, debris, or all of the above. So we'll give it a few more seconds. Let everybody get the chance to answer. Give it your best guess. This is anonymous, it's not graded. Just like to see where people are starting from.
All right, I think we got all the responses. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. All right, so to get right in there, let's start with a little bit of background and talk about debris. Litter or debris, both are pervasive issues around the world, and in Miami-Dade County and City of Miami, that is no different. Marine debris in particular is anything that is man-made that enters the coastal or marine environment. And since we're so connected by water here in Miami, all debris is or will become marine debris. There are some data points that have cataloged how much marine debris has been removed from the environment over the years, namely by the Ocean Conservancy's annual event, the International Coastal Cleanup. This is a one-day event that happens in countries all around the world in which people work simultaneously removing debris from our coastlines. This event has been going strong for over 35 years, and every year the Ocean Conservancy compiles all of the data that is captured. So it's not just marine debris removal, but also the cataloging of every piece of debris that is taken out of the environment. And they produce these reports that showcase and highlight all of the work, all of the effort, all of the items. This infographic that you're currently looking at shows the grand total across over 30 years worth of cleanups. And if we want to look more specifically, the 2020 data, the 2021 data is not ready just yet. You can see that the top 10 items that have been found, the majority of them are or contain plastic. So plastic, unfortunately, is incredibly pervasive. It's ubiquitous. It's found everywhere in every water body around the world. One thing that I want to point out here is that this is a great snapshot of an international effort. However, there isn't data that's this specific to Miami-Dade County. And this is where the University of Georgia's Circularity Assessment Protocol comes in. In 2021, the Ocean Conservancy partnered with the University of Georgia and City of Miami to perform this Circularity Assessment Protocol, or CAP for short, to determine debris accumulation, sources of debris, and opportunities to mitigate debris within the City of Miami. And this was done at UGA's Circularity Informatics Lab under the direction of Dr. Jenna Jambek. And what's particularly exciting is that the City of Miami is the first city in the United States to complete a CAP. This has been done in other countries, but this is the first time that it's happened in the United States. And the idea behind this study is that it can empower the city in decision-making and answer important questions, such as how plastic is used and disposed of in Miami, what actions can change the way that it is used, how circularity can be increased, and what items end up on the ground and ultimately in Miami's waters. The CAP report is a roughly 90-page document, so a little bit of light reading, that is publicly available and exists in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. And I will be sharing links later to where you can access that document. These are the 7 spokes or areas of study that determine and create the CAP. The first is the input, and that's to say what goes into or ends up in a community. There is a community assessment component, examining people's knowledge, attitudes, and perceptions of plastic and pollution. Material and product design. How are the packaging and products that provide people with goods designed? Of course, use. Are these single-use items versus items that can be reused? The collection of these materials. The end of cycle, or how these materials are managed. And then finally, the leakage. What ends up on the ground? What litter is leaking out of the system? And the whole idea is to figure out how not to create waste in the first place. I'd like to highlight that this is a very holistic approach, a very holistic protocol, and it relies upon other data points beyond cataloging trash that is collected. This included assessments of products and packaging at stores across the city, interviews with government representatives, industry and nonprofit employees, characterizing material types for consumer plastic items, cost analysis of reusable products and alternatives to plastic, and visual audits of recycling contamination, among other things. The ultimate long-term goal of this CAP is to lead to a circular economy. And circular economy is defined as a system in which plastic materials and products are recirculated to reduce waste, pollution, and emissions in support of a healthier ocean and a more just world. So we're looking to eliminate the use of single-use plastics through lifestyle-focused design, innovative materials, and reuse models, so that we're making sure that all the plastics are free of hazardous materials. Their production, use, and end-of-life management does not contribute to the environmental, social, or health impacts, especially within marginalized communities. I want to take a few moments to share some of the data, some of the results of the CAP study. And the first that I thought was particularly impactful was the average poundage of trash generated per person per day in the United States. And that's 4.9 pounds. However, when you compare that to the average per person per day in Miami-Dade County, which is 7.9 pounds, that's a 61% difference. It's 61% higher, which is pretty staggering. So that is higher than the entire average of the United States. The infographic on the left of your screen shows that over 50% of the items found in the studies were plastic. I'd also like to draw your attention to the infographic along the right side that shows that the city of Miami's population is 470,000 and growing. So you can imagine how much that's going to end up being, especially given that the county's population is at 2.7 million people and growing. And within the city of Miami, 59% of the population are born in another country, which is the highest that we have. Additionally, more than almost 80% of our population speak languages aside from English, and 70% of the city of Miami residents speak Spanish. And lastly, when we consider that one of the major economic drivers in Miami-Dade County and City of Miami Beach, is tourism, that increased pressure, more people, more bodies equals more waste. That is also more waste to manage. On your screen now is a map of the 5 City of Miami Commission districts. And this was another piece of data that came from the CAP that demonstrated the density of litter found within each district. And what I thought was really interesting was that aside from one of the higher counts being in Commission 2 here, which is roughly Coconut Grove, a more coastal area, the #1 highest litter output was within District 1, which is more inland. So this CAP, it's a 90-page report. There's also a condensed version, which is about 24 pages. So that's the Cliff Notes, the high-level summary, if that 90 pages is a little bit too much. But from there, then what? The Ocean Conservancy really wanted to take the CAP and use it to implement meaningful change. Ocean Conservancy did not want another scientific study with a report, no matter how interesting, no matter how important. They did not want another scientific report that would then sit on a shelf and collect dust. And so the Ocean Conservancy envisioned community work that would make the recommendations generated by the CAP a reality. And so to do that, this was all part of Ocean Conservancy's Shores Forward initiative. And in this initiative, TOC for short, partners with local leaders to protect Florida's coastal resources. And many of their projects address water quality issues, carbon and debris pollution, marine wildlife conflicts, and more. Ocean Conservancy and City of Miami, along with the help of Ascendance Sustainability Group, decided to convene a working group to create a grassroots effort to try and create effective change from the CAP information. And at this point, this is where I came in to this whole story, in that I was contacted by Ocean Conservancy to design and facilitate an engagement strategy for City of Miami working group members to not only better understand the findings of the CAP, but to help develop and take ownership of some of its recommendations. Since I didn't introduce myself in the beginning, I'll take the opportunity to do so here. I am the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent in Miami-Dade County, which is a branch of the University of Florida's IFAS Extension Service. And both UF IFAS Extension and Florida Sea Grant's roles are to provide science-based information to stakeholder groups, members of the community, and in my case, the coastal community. And we're doing this in the form of extension education or teaching. And our goals in our work are not only to teach people things, but ultimately to change their behavior, and in hopes and to be able to document positive social, economic, and environmental change. And while historically our roles as extension agents were as educators, were to teach, that has started growing more large. It's growing larger. In addition to being these conduits of research-based information, we are starting to be called upon to convene communities and create spaces for deliberative discussions and community engagement. And I was really pleased to be asked to join this effort and felt pretty well prepared to do so. In addition to various facilitation trainings I have participated in over the years, I was also a fellow in the University of Florida's Natural Resources Leadership Institute, which provides training in conflict management, planning, collaborative processes, and community engagement. I felt really happy and confident that Ocean Conservancy and Ascendance, they did the great majority of the groundwork when it came to pulling together this working group. And so it was very important. I gave a little bit of input, but they were pretty much right on the money into what they should be thinking about when pulling together a group of people to represent all of these different areas. First, that was very important, was trying to ensure appropriate representation from a majority of those City of Miami Commission districts. This is really important. I'd like to highlight this, is also ensuring that our Spanish-speaking only population were engaged. In addition to that, hiring professional translation services so that the meetings could be fully bilingual and not shortchanging any speaker of any language. Time of residence in Miami was also considered. It was critical that the majority of the group weren't all short-term residents or seasonal residents, or weren't all long-term residents. We wanted the group to have a pretty diverse and balanced viewpoint of their experiences living in the city. And then, of course, taking into consideration individuals' level of engagement or knowledge or activism around the subject. And then, of course, the big number one question was how to bring all of these people together to a process that was active and engaging, that wasn't just another series of meetings. Because we've all been there, we've attended meetings, whether in person or virtually, where we sit and are frustrated or bored or both and wonder, this is really not the best use of my time, could have been an email. That was exactly the opposite of what we wanted to achieve with the working group. Going back to my training with NERLI, I'm going to take this moment just to teach you guys a couple of things, because I can, because we're all here. And that's to discuss the differences between a moderator and a facilitator. These words are often used, you'll hear them, and they're often used interchangeably, but for the purposes of my work, they have two very different meanings. First is that a moderator is an individual who can be the person to gather people, but largely they're the person who runs the meeting or is in charge of the meeting or the gathering of individuals. That is a little bit different from a facilitator. Facilitator is there, they have, number one, done the legwork and planned a very specific agenda to meet objectives. And they are doing that and considering in the differences of experience, the different personalities, so that they can encourage full participation, promoting of strong thinking, promotion of mutual understanding, fostering inclusive solutions, and cultivating shared responsibility. So the role of a facilitator is very, very important and critical to a process like this. So I wanted to take this opportunity and point that out. So when you're thinking about meetings you attend, or if you have the opportunity to participate in a similar process, you're thinking about these things in the back of your mind. The working group was, from my point of view, a huge success. There were 14 members ultimately selected, with 4 out of 5 City of Miami Commission districts represented. These individuals committed to attending, and not just attending, but actively participating in 5 two-hour meetings. We were able to procure professional live interpretation services, as well as provide food. Additionally, Ocean Conservancy was able to provide stipends or honorariums to all the participants. And in considering all of these factors, what we were really trying to accomplish was eliminating any barriers that might present a conflict for people's participation. Now, this slide says the ultimate goal, but really there were 2 major goals of this working group's process. Number 1 was to learn more and better understand the recommendations that were put forth by the CAP, but also to develop and parse out a subset of those recommendations to create an action guide. Now, this wasn't just about whittling down from 23 recommendations to a smaller number, but to create something that had local level support and had been given some thought in terms of development, logistics, planning, implementation, and creating this guide that could be then handed to elected officials so they could then take it and run with it and start working on some of these immediately. Now, for the recommendations that came from the CAP, Ocean Conservancy grouped them into 3 categories. And the original recommendations corresponded directly to that, one of the very first slides that showed the 7 spokes of the wheel of the CAP. But to try to streamline it and make it a little bit easier to understand, they were grouped into these 3 categories. First were government recommendations, or things that would require government or elected officials to work on, such as proposing policy or legislative changes. The second category were social recommendations, so things that could be done at a grassroots level within the communities themselves. And the third category were civic recommendations, which were a blend of government and social. So from day 1, the very first meeting, some of these people, they knew each other before, but a lot of them didn't know each other, and they broke through any discomfort or shyness right away and started working immediately. They got to do this through a very specifically developed icebreaker to get to know one another and start to understand the concerns within their respective communities. They also had an educational presentation by one of the University of Georgia lab members who was a part of conducting the CAP. She's featured here in these photographs. And this presentation was really important to help further their understanding in terms of the methods of the CAP and the results, and create the foundation for the work that they would be doing in the coming weeks. Now, across the span of 5 meetings, which 5 meetings, roughly 2 hours, on paper it was 10 hours, in reality it was probably closer to 15 to 17 hours of time. They were really dedicated and worked beyond the initial time limits. They worked to identify issues within their own communities, and in discussing these with the larger group, were able to determine where there were similarities and differences across the different neighborhoods. They had to start prioritizing the recommendations, so starting to consider what was important to them, what would be important to their community, or both, just to try and start whittling down that initial number. Part of this process included the identification of similar work that was already ongoing in whichever community, as well as who is doing it. Also identifying potential partners and funding sources. And all of these considerations help to develop the recommendations into a draft plan, if you will. And that development, that's where everything was specifically identified as to the who, what, when, why, how, and where. And on the very last night, the final night, all of this work was supposed to result in 6 recommendations, but it ended up being 7, and that was after 2 ties and a tiebreaker, 2 tiebreaker activities. And these were ranked based upon the feasibility, benefits, and cost of those recommendations. So we figure, it doesn't have to be 6, 7 is a good number. And the slide is a little text heavy, so I'm gonna summarize what you're about to see. Within the government category, looking into alternatives for delivery and having the producers take responsibility for the plastics that are manufactured and brought into the city. Prioritization of a storm drain filter system that will help keep out items larger than 5 centimeters. In the civic category, working on investing in educational campaigns, especially within lower income and less accessible communities, to really try and build a stronger sense of community pride and spirit within these City of Miami areas. Recommending that the waste and recycling department needs more staff. And in addition to this, local community leaders that can work together with the waste and recycling department to try and serve as messengers and educate as to what should be thrown out, what should be recycled, and ways to reduce inputs. From a social perspective, looking at engaging the youth within each community to not only lead cleanups, but teaching them and grooming them to be these leaders and foster connections between everyday items and the litter that ends up on the street. Increasing both formal and informal education in Miami. And lastly, working specifically with the tourist and boating community, as one of the major problematic areas identified were the spoil islands in Biscayne Bay that are visited by boats and jet skiers pretty frequently. One other really interesting tool that was featured that Ocean Conservancy brought in was a graphic artist. And this gentleman's name is Shane. And during every meeting, Shane was there taking notes, making sketches, and created these renderings. And these we had up, we broadcasted them at the start of each meeting, as a way to refresh people's memories and set the tone for the following meeting and the work that was going to be done. And this served as a great tool because it provided visual cohesion to not only what had happened at the meeting, but what was accomplished. So there were 5 drawings, 1 for each meeting, and they're just really fascinating, and they're bilingual, which I was really impressed by because Shane worked with the translators to make sure that his language was correct. So since this process wrapped this past spring, there has been quite a lot going on. The first is that the action guide is almost ready for public reveal. It will be released at the end of this month. And so this is a mock-up of what it's going to look like. It's going to be this really nifty little 3D thing, little pop-up thing that summarizes the recommendations in the categories. Something else I want to explain before I explain the connection is that Miami-Dade County is collaborating with local and state partners to develop a reasonable assurance plan, or RAP, for parts of Biscayne Bay. And this is essentially a management plan that's going to set target points and help bring funding to address pollution and water quality issues within the bay. And the map that you're seeing on the right half of your screen shows that the first phase of this process is covering areas towards the northern part of the county, but also inland, with the main focus being on the Little River and the Biscayne Canal. And in addition to Miami-Dade County and other local partners, one of the working group members is pretty actively involved and providing input into the RAP process. 2 of the working group leaders in Little Havana have become very active advocates and community leaders, educating through their professional and personal social media accounts. The CAP has also been used by Miami-Dade County committees to justify action on marine debris prevention. Namely, it's being used to provide outreach in communities away from the bay and treating plastic as a pollutant in waterways. I'd like to point out that late this spring, a resolution was passed by the Biscayne Bay Watershed Management Advisory Board recommending that code changes for stormwater drains be updated specifically to address and mitigate for debris, plastic debris. And the CAP report has been used to justify action on marine debris prevention. We have participation from a local marine debris nonprofit, Debris Free Oceans. And in addition to their cleanup events within City of Miami Beach, they have been expanding and going into other communities, namely Hialeah, and working with Spanish-speaking communities to try and start fostering a dialogue outside of where they started. And I will provide a link to their website because they put on events pretty frequently and also do a great deal of work with local businesses in getting them to switch to a more sustainable practice and reduce the use of single-use items. The Ocean Conservancy has also been working with nonprofit Sasha Mama on legislative visits and have been scheduling them since earlier in the summer. And these visits are to start dialogue with local elected officials and educate them on what their constituents have been learning about and doing. And the idea is after the initial outreach by Ocean Conservancy, the residents will join future visits to talk about the priorities and what they would like to see happen. And this is based upon those 7 recommendations that the working group developed. And the last bit about this is that there are other caps being discussed and proposed in other Florida cities, and not just the performance of the CAP protocol itself, but also a similar type of community engagement strategy that we had, similar to what we had here in the city of Miami. Now, I told you I'd give you a way to get to that CAP report. There are different ways that you can get involved with this entire process. First, if you're bored, it's a windy or rainy or hurricaney, let me not say that, but if it's a slow weekend, you want to read the report, you can scan this QR code. I will also provide a link to it, as well as a link to the condensed report in the email that I send to all of you. There will still be the need for coastal cleanups. That is not going to stop. So I encourage you, if you've done it before, please do it again. If you've never done it, jump on in and participate. And a great opportunity to do this is coming up on September 17th. It's the annual International Coastal Cleanup that I was talking about in the beginning, Saturday, September 17th. And there are, I think, over 40 sites within Miami-Dade County alone. And I will include a link to how to participate in that event as well. Maybe taking some of this information and looking at some of those figures that you heard about here tonight, considering how to reduce your own impact. What can you do? Say you already carry your own reusable water bottle, or you already use reusable grocery bags. How can you take your own practices a step further? I will definitely provide contact to our local person at Ocean Conservancy, because I know that he will be more than willing and ready and able to point you in the right direction if working or talking with elected officials or attending some of these different meetings and giving input is something that you'd be interested in. I know that he will help make that connection. And the last thing I want to highlight is using, oh, was I on the wrong slide this whole time? What happened? Sorry, everybody. I don't know what that was all about, but hopefully you should see it now. There should be 2 screenshots on the right side of your screen for a web platform and app called IC-Change. And IC-Change exists around the country, and depending on where it exists depends on the local partnerships. So right now in Florida, I think it's only available in Miami-Dade, but this was an app that was designed to serve as a reporting mechanism for climate change related phenomena like flooding or sunny day, high tide events, etc. However, IC-Change now is being used and is accessed by City of Miami Commission staff. And so we've stressed this to the working group, and they're stressing it to their stakeholders to use this app to report litter in your neighborhoods. And the reason for that is so that there is continuous data being collected, because one of the concerns, and I'm not saying this belongs to anyone in particular, but one of the arguments that has been heard in the past is, oh, okay, well, great, you did a scientific study, but that was then, you know, maybe that's not happening now. And the point of using IC-Change is to continue building that basis of information that shows that this is a continual problem and needs to be addressed. So whether it's flooding, whether it's debris accumulations or other events, environmental events, harmful algal blooms. We recently had a localized fish kill that was reported in IC-Change. This is a wonderful platform, and it is constantly being monitored by IC-Change staff. And that individual is also shuffling the reports to make sure that the appropriate City of Miami commissioner is seeing them. So now, everybody, we've gotten through all the heavy stuff. I want to invite you to take one more quiz before we move on to the Q&A. This ends my formal speech. So these should look familiar. Number 1, CAP stands for Circularity Assessment Protocol. Number 2, the average pounds of trash per person per day in Miami-Dade County is 4.9 pounds, 5.9 pounds, 6.9 pounds, or 7.9 pounds. IC-Change can be used to report flooding, fish kills, debris, or all of the above. And the very last question, that wasn't there when we started, that's just asking about what you might do with this information. Hopefully, or not, do you intend to apply it or share the information that you've learned today?
Give it a few more seconds here.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Excuse me. Whew. So while you guys are all finishing that up, I want to extend my sincerest thanks to my colleague, Danny from Ocean Conservancy, Viv from Ascendant Sustainability Group, my colleagues Lisa and Joy, who really helped me work through what we were going to do with the group, my colleagues and friends at Debris Free Oceans, and also those 14 individual working group members who let me be in their lives for about a month and a half. So
All right. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. And thank you so much, Anna. That was really great to go step by step through that process and, breaking down, how this went. And I think a lot of great information and follow-up still to be done. So at this time, guys, it's about a little after 6:40. So if you guys have to head out, that's totally cool. We are going to stay on. And if you have any questions for Anna, or want to discuss anything related to this, we'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and type your questions in the chat, and I'll moderate that as we go. Anna, I know you can see those as well. And again, thank you for tuning in, guys. We really appreciate it and look forward to sharing some more information as we go. Again, this was recorded, so we'll send this out in the next couple days. And we have our next talk on Wednesday, September 14th. That's going to be on hurricanes in a changing climate, presented by Mary Beth Arcodia. So yeah, we look forward to seeing you. And if you have any questions, yeah, we'll go ahead and answer those now.